Hi, Dave.
Hello.
How was your day?
I'll be very honest and tell you that I'm as itchy and as antsy as I think I've been in. I can't tell you when.
Got it.
I'm just I I've done as much around the house as I possibly can, with what else. And I think if the weather would change, it would just be so much nicer. The,
Mhm.
the cold weather and the rain is
Hello?
just a downer.
Hi, Howard.
Hi, Howard.
Excuse me.
Go downstairs. We'll go downstairs.
See, I always have trouble getting audio on.
You're on.
Hello.
Hi.
Have yours turned up?
I don't think so.
Yeah, you're
My
on.
computer is on. No, you're on.
How's that?
You're on.
There.
You have
Sure.
three things you have to turn on.
Come on back.
Quite a few. You know, Dave, I have lost about between 3 and 5 pounds in the past 2 weeks just because of long walks with the dogs.
That's all Cooper wants. See, we're in this stage now where he doesn't know what's going on.
Right.
I'm having to go out to walk like once every 2 hours, which is driving me nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I'm not losing any weight. I'm probably just sitting around eating, doing too much because there's not much else to do. You know.
Yep. Steve, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for inviting.
I'm glad you're here.
I appreciate the invitation. It's a very pleasant change from the usual that I have to go through every day.
Yep.
Very nice. How many more are expected?
3 or 4, maybe.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Dave Shaw, Jay, Dave Hayes.
Yeah, let's hope the chair shows up.
That would be good.
I'm sure he will. He's the one he sent an email out saying that they don't forget. So
Yeah.
Does anyone know how to send a email with the invite to the Zoom?
Let's see, I think it's under participants. If you just hit on the left, when you hit participants, a word will come up that says invite. And if you click on that, you get a form. You can just type the address in and send it.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see it.
Yeah,
All right, thank you.
sure.
Ah, there you are.
There he is. Mark, you're always in a different spot in the house every time you Zoom.
I just do different angles. Like yesterday, I had it up here on the table, so I was like this. So
Okay, that's it.
now I've got the. I'm in the relaxed position here.
Is that it?
Aren't we all?
Mm.
A little too relaxed.
Anybody watch John Krasinski's what's it called, Susan?
Jack Ryan.
Some Good News.
Oh,
I watched it once.
SGN. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. He was joking that he was doing a show. I think he's wearing like a sports jacket, and somebody was joking with him that the top or the bottoms probably didn't match the tops, and he was like, "Yeah, you're probably right."
Yeah.
Hello, Steve. David Shaw here. Nice to meet you in person, kind of.
Good to see you.
Dave Shaw, was that a cattail that I saw waving in front of you?
Yeah, yeah. She loves working on the computer.
Literally on the computer.
Yeah, exactly. She's just hanging out here,
Yeah.
waiting for her turn.
Tom, you finally have audio.
I have my audio on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Hi, George.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Howard.
Good evening. How you doing?
George, I noticed you've moved to the other end of the couch.
Yes.
And it only took you 24 hours to do it.
You've had a busy day.
Bill, Michael?
Oh, Michael's on.
Yeah.
It was her birthday today.
It
I
was.
feel like Bill Michael looks like he's ready to do a music video.
Yes, I'm in my quarantine, living in my coal mine cave. Actually, if you face the window with the light shining on your face, the camera can't see anything behind you, so it just looks all black.
Yeah. Oh, Linda, you have a text from Kristen. They're okay. They don't need any. You have a text from Kristen.
Oh, okay.
They're okay. They don't need anything.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
The
Steve,
Senate
we're
approved
waiting for the
the
committee
extension of
chair.
the-
Waiting for Jay. Oh, there he
Yeah.
is.
For Jay.
Hey, Tom.
There he is.
Oh, wait, he was texting me. Can you send me the meeting password? I can't get in.
I just got in, Mark.
Oh, okay.
Abracadabra.
Oh, 595-216.
You have to put a quarter in the slot on the side of your monitor.
Couldn't find the slot. That was a problem.
Good one.
It
Good
only
one.
takes Bitcoin.
The finance chair is lacking the quarter.
Won't take Chinese money, though.
He doesn't use cash. Well, we might have another person or two join, but I think we could probably get started if you want. Since I had the conversation with Steve, I'll just kind of kick it off. So you see Steve Kambick on your screens. He's from PETRA. Is that it, Steve?
The Greek name for rock or stone, Jesus referred to Peter as Petra.
Ah, so they already do good works in Phoenixville. So he's here to kind of brief us on what it looks like to go through this process, and maybe a little bit on, is there a potential partnership with us and them, and saving time for questions.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to be very disappointed if this PowerPoint I worked on today doesn't show up on our screen. So I've been extremely busy because we have 120 elderly only apartments in those buildings where everyone is elderly. another building, 19, disabled only. And then at Steeltown, we have a full mix of every imaginable 1, 2, and 3 bedroom resident. So we've been real busy trying to keep up with all the changing rules to try to protect our residents. So this was a very good therapy for me to try to get away from the day-to-day. We're doing a big meal distribution this week with the help of the senior center and so forth. These are some of the things that we're not supposed to be doing. What we create is known as independent living housing. This is not assisted living or anything like that. That's a whole different brand of housing. We've never done that. We're not intending to do that. So even our disabled only, each of them is responsible for their household. However, if they want 1 aid, 2 aid, 3, doesn't matter. That's all their responsibility. But what we do is we provide a services coordinator available to them in all of our buildings. So all they have to do is make a phone call, and I have 2 different people they can work with to try to figure out things of government assistance or answer questions on a myriad of topics. So I will, if you have no further questions, I'll get into the PowerPoint, and I'm going to try to go through it as quickly as possible. We definitely need to have time for questions. I'm sure there will be. I've numbered all the slides. So if anyone wants to ask a question, feel free to ask. But if you think that it can wait till the end, maybe you might want to even just jot down the number of the slide. We can go right to it. Whatever works best, so it moves along. We make sure to have questions at the end. I'm sure there will be plenty of those, but I've tried to answer a lot of questions in the process of the slide. So let's see if I can do this technology thing here.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So it's about 21 slides, and it's just for today's presentation. So this was made just for today, but I tried to, as I said, address as many questions as possible. And there are a number of answers that I'm sure I'm seeking and you're seeking. I'm going to try to answer as much as I can. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to create income one time or over a period of time? What are the ramifications of having a lease? Explore mutual benefit, and how does one proceed? What might be the next steps in property development? So there are 3 areas I'm going to cover in this order. Overview of the development process. What I explained to Dave is that I'm very uncomfortable trying to be like a salesperson. So I can't do that. But what I can do is try to explain what goes on when affordable housing is created. Number 1. Number 2, I can talk about what Petra Community Housing, what it is trying to accomplish when it does its next project, wherever that is. And at the moment, we're putting our efforts primarily into the Phoenixville area, looking for a site. And number 3, what is it about what the church is talking about that may work or not work, whatever the aspects are. So in this order, 1, 2, 3, and each of those, there are 4 items I wish to cover. So the development process, what is it? Well, one aspect of it is known as site control. Site control means that the developer has the ability legally to do what's necessary to develop that land. And the title has to be good enough, and the who's doing what has to be clear. Sometimes there are co-developers, and there are all kinds of agreements as to how to proceed, but that's all related to control of the site. And site control is very important because we're talking millions of dollars to create housing. So your investor, your bank, et cetera, your funders look at site control very, very hard. Another aspect to the development process is what's known as the financing feasibility. So we have to make sure that there is a property that we can work with, and we have to know that we have dollars. And to proceed, there's several types of financing. There's permanent financing, like a mortgage on our house. Construction financing, and sometimes construction and permanent are all rolled into the same product, and sometimes they're different. It all depends on the source of the financing. There are always development subsidies, and there's always a gap. I've had people in workshops say, well, how do you, create affordable housing? Like, I don't understand how you can do that. I said, that's easy. I need to get subsidies. If I don't get subsidy, I'm going to be having to pay the same rates as market rate or luxury housing. How can I possibly make it affordable? So there have to be subsidies involved somewhere, and there's always a gap. The sources, and every time you do a deal, there's always, initially, all the sources you find, there's always one, two, or whatever more you have to go after. And that's called the gap financing. There's always a gap to fill. And as you prepare to get your financing, there are two documents you have to create. One is a 15-year pro forma showing how you're going to be able to cover your operating costs for 15 years. And then there is the industry standards, because in this business, everybody knows what's reasonable to pay an architect, what's reasonable for costs for your contractor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of requirements. It's been said, and it's true. It actually costs more to build affordable housing than luxury housing, because all the amenities that are required to be added in, and you have to show that this is all possible over at least a 15-year period. And I can explain later why the 15 versus some other period. And again, I can stop anytime if you want. A third aspect to being successful in development is having the right team. Typically it's one developer. You can occasionally have a co-developer. Steeltown Village, our latest project, we had 2 different architectural firms, 3 different architects, 5 engineers. One company did both the market analysis and property appraisal. General contractor, some of the subcontractors were more critical than others. I lost track how many meetings with the contractors, subcontractors, engineers, etc., just to get it to the point of being able to build it, just the design process. And of course, you need a development advisor unless you've done this a lot of times. And Petra Community Housing is a small company. We have not done this a lot of times. This was our first time in the state of Pennsylvania ever attempting to do something of this scale. And we were successful. And the fourth and final thing I'm going to touch on for the development process is it feasible? Is the development itself feasible? The property itself has to have value. And it means that the assets you're creating have to be able to stand the test of time. The project itself has to have all those things that funders want to see: the energy value, the amenities for the tenants, the square foot for the apartments, goes on and on and on. How much benefit is there to the community and the region is very important. Chester County, several years ago, Lou Beccaria said the most important social concern in this county is the lack of affordable housing. And the state is well aware of that. So if you create affordable housing in Chester County, outside of Coatesville, which is where most of the concentration has been, then Harrisburg is very interested in that. Politically, you may have a great project, but someone else may actually be able to bump you out. It happens. Do you have the ability to proceed? In other words, every legal impediment, and there are all kinds of municipal and other soil conservation, you name it, approvals. Have you jumped all those hoops? And if you don't have evidence that you have, funders will go with someone who has. And last is, does the funder really like it? When we did Steeltown Village, we created housing that was affordable to veterans, persons with permanent disabilities, large families, seniors, small families with a single wage earner struggling. And we made it affordable. And we're supporting the workforce. I mean, it had everything that they wanted. That made it desirable to the funder. So that was the process. What is PETRA trying to do? Well, in a strategic plan that's on the website, we're saying that we want to focus for sure to at least create housing for elderly and disabled. Right now at Steeltown, we're getting calls, well, we were before the COVID-19, 1, 2, 3 times a week. Most of them are from disabled persons looking for housing. We only opened up admissions for 2 months prior, that was before we signed the first lease, for 2 months, closed it, haven't opened it since. And the demand is just so high. If we'd left it open for admissions, I never would have had time to move anybody in. I would have been too busy processing applications. So that waiting list remains closed. There are a lot of struggling small families that are looking for affordable housing. It's difficult for a family in an area that's booming like Phoenixville to be able to be blue collar, live and work in the same community. And when you're creating housing like this, it's either classified as general occupancy or senior only. There's no in between. You can't have, well, these units over here are going to be seniors and these over here are going to be general occupancy. That would violate fair housing laws. So for example, Steeltown Village, I set aside a number of units for disabled. That you can do under fair housing laws. So all of the veterans that are getting special subsidy because they're a military service vet, that was set aside for them. Other persons with permanent disability, but it's a general occupancy housing. So some seniors came there, but I couldn't set it aside for seniors unless it was a senior only building. Then we're also wanting to address social determinants of health. This is the big push in this country right now. There is a connection knowing that proper nutrition, access to health care, quality housing, income stability, et cetera, they all influence a person's health and abilities to thrive. There are rules with the Affordable Care Act that if every not-for-profit hospital in this country has to implement a community health plan. Since we want to create this connection, this nexus between health and housing, and I'm telling you, no one fully understands how to make it work. It's been tried in some places, and I'm not saying it hasn't been tried successfully, but there's no formula. No one publishes a formula saying they have it figured out. And yet hospitals like Tower Health, because they're a nonprofit, are required to create a plan, which they have. And I met with them. They wish to partner with us because they're under a mandate to do this. And I want to do it because not only I think it's a good thing, but I know my funders would be very anxious to fund us if we could do something in that area. And affordable housing is also a tool to help the community. You're not seeing anymore what we used to see years ago. Cornfield, the middle of nowhere, build senior housing. Those days are pretty much gone, except in a very rural area. When you're building housing, affordable housing these days, it's got to be helping and integral with the community. Maybe it's part of some economic development plans. Maybe it's helping to end the cycle of poverty, but it's doing something very positive in the community. And the more it does that, literally, the more points that the application has, more likely it gets funded. And last, regarding objectives for PETRA, is the programs that built the Freedom House that I manage in Royersford, the Flag House that I manage in Spring City, the Bard Complex in Spring City, these are disabled or elderly only. Those programs are either 100% gone or virtually gone. And what's replaced them the last 40, 50 years or so is the low-income housing tax credit program, which is the Internal Revenue Service, because Congress decided, change the tax code. Instead of creating another HUD program, they said, well, we're going to change the tax code, therefore private sector is going to compete for tax credits. And there's two types of tax credits you can go for, and we only go for what's known as 9% credits, and those credits are very hard to come by, but the payoff is they provide in the neighborhood of 70% of all the costs needed to build. Land purchase, off-site work is excluded from credit. So in other words, for every, what you show as a developer is this is how much it costs to build so-and-so, and therefore I should get credits, tax credits associated with what it costs me to build. And the IRS says, yeah, but we're not going to include the cost for land. So any amount of land costs, there's no way a developer can create credits to offset the cost of land. So what every developer looks for is land that costs as little as possible because they can't get this, they can't generate tax credits from that. The commitments for this on the part of anyone financing this, the investor has a 15-year commitment. So if things go wrong in year one, they have to be part of the partnership for 15 years because the IRS says, hey, you said you wanted to get the credits. Well, you're going to get whatever comes with it. The general partner, 25 years. I can explain as much as you want on this. I'm going to try to get through to the end. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions. Look at it this way. We all understand baseball. The competition is so fierce that typically it's 1 in 5, a 200 batting average, to get funded when you try to do a project. That's based on how many applications there are in any given year and the amount of funding available for those applications. So that's a rough average from year to year. PETRA Community Housing, we have less than 10 full-time staff. So we're not like a large for-profit company that says, hey, we're gonna submit 5 of these things, and if 2 of them get funded, that's a 400 batting average. That's great. But for Petra, to submit one of these projects, it costs us well over between $200,000 and $400,000 of monies we had to risk to do Siltown. The investment you have to, the risk you have to take is huge. And the IRS and so forth understands that, but this is absolutely a for-profit risk reward situation. And with Petra Community Housing for Stilltown, we hit the home run because we did what is supposedly never supposed to happen. We got funded the first time we submitted an application, the first time we became a developer to try to submit an application for our first project. It just, we were told it just doesn't happen. So what is the church proposing? Well, I'm suggesting I try to answer or discuss compatibility that the church is proposing with the development process I've discussed briefly. What are the site limitations and opportunities? Every site is different. Every site has its own unique characteristics. What's the feasibility of a partnership, and what possible plans? And of course, those are just areas I'm going to try to cover. There's a myriad of other things we could talk about. So number one, the development process. And this is the information I was given is exploring a lease on portions of the property. Because of the requirement, such as it is for site control, I don't know how it's possible with the lease for land. So the only scenario I'm aware of, and my development advisor may have a different understanding because they've done this many, many times over, I have not, is that everyone I've seen, the developer has to have 100% site control at time of application. Then you wait, could be 8 months, whatever, to find out if you're going to get the tax credits. And unless you can guarantee for the entire life, the compliance period of the project that you can maintain site control, then they will not consider you. Deed covenants, however, I believe, and use agreement fees, I think they may be allowed with a tax credit project. I haven't heard of that, but I'm assuming that is possible. There are a lot of different types of deed covenants that have been used over the years. I've been familiar with a couple of them that are quite unusual, but they've been able to work. If I'm going to go after a tax credit, which is what my board tells me to do, then I'm beholden to the IRS and the rules of the IRS to go after and all the rules associated with that. And finally, a land development loan, I believe, can create long-term income. So for example, for Stilltown Village, we applied and received in the neighborhood of $10 million of tax credit. So as a developer, I successfully got $10 million of tax credit. I turned that into equity, whereby my investor, not all at one time, gives me $10 million in cash. Now I'm rounding the numbers. I'm not being exact for the sake of simplicity. And I also, now 10 million sounds like a lot of money, but the project costs around 14 million. So now I have a $4 million gap. So another 2 million was filled by the bank with a private loan. So I'm assuming there are ways that loans can augment if the church is looking for long-term funding. Number two, what about the property itself, the site? And there's two ways, at least looking at this. One is that 3-acre portion, and then the other is on the front. So I'm going to try to discuss both of those in the context of what is the zoning and neighborhood uses, what is the soil permeability, how does that affect things, vehicular parking, what is the desired appearance when we're all done, and we can't forget NIMBY. Now, zoning is paramount as to what you can or can't do, and you can go to the borough and ask for certain relief, a certain zoning. Now, we knew we were going to have a lot of pushback trying to build family housing in Phoenixville. So when we applied, there were no variances, special use, any exception asked for or granted on purpose. So 100% complied with the zoning, and still we had all kinds of pushback because people said, we don't want those people, living in our area. That was family housing. Soil permeability is very important to the Soil Conservation Service. You can't just put asphalt and roofing over your whole site. You've got to allow the aquifer to regenerate. So you need a certain amount of area that allows water to percolate. So much of the Steeltown parking lot is permeable asphalt, which is much more expensive than the normal asphalt and has to be maintained in a special way forever. And I had to sign a certification to that. And of course, parking and so forth. So we're going to discuss those within the context of what we're looking at. So the project site is in the RI, Residential Infill Zoning District. And you can see from the color in the map, most of Phoenixville is in the RI zone, which makes sense. The borough redid its zoning ordinance a number of years ago, and they're looking at another redo in the next 2 to 3 years. But they had, like, at one time, maybe 20 districts. Then they reduced it, made it much more simple, and permitted within the RI zone is residential and community gardens. That's what's permitted. Conditional use means you have to go to the borough council if you wanted a community center or some institutional use. Maybe that means if the hospital wanted a site for a small clinic or something on the property. Whatever the borough decides is within the definition of institutional is institutional. Okay, so a lot of restrictions on the site due to that type of zone. Those are the only things that are permitted or by conditional use if the borough council specifically does it. I did get a conditional use not long ago from the borough, creating special housing for persons in recovery from addiction and so forth. And so it is possible to do it. So what are the surrounding uses? Well, typically it's 2-story homes, 1 or 2. So I say that because Steeltown was 3 stories, and walk-ups over flats. So all the first floor were either the handicap or 1 bedroom, so forth, and the upper floor, everyone had a separate entrance, were for the 2 and 3 bedroom primarily. And that worked fine there because of the height. But on this site, would the community be happy if there were a 3-story building? And if there's not a 3-story building, it severely lessens the number of dwelling units that can be built. It is near a bus route. It's near a hospital, commercial area. So it accomplishes what's known as walkability. Matter of fact, you can get scores on that. mathematical logarithm calculating your walkability score. So in many respects, it's a very good site. Doesn't have, it has a lot of restrictions on zoning, but what about parking? There's a lot of asphalt around the church. Is it 100% used for the church? Can it be used as sometimes for another use on that site? You never want to build, in my opinion, more parking asphalt than necessary. We were required to build 60 on site. We built 84 because the neighbors complained so much that we didn't have enough parking, which is their way to try to kill the project, because they couldn't come right out and say about the people they assumed I would rent to. And of course, I go to the next person on the waiting list. I don't decide who I'm allowed to rent to. I could go to jail for that. So how about extending Virginia Ave? Yes, that's certainly an interesting concept here. If Virginia Ave is extended, does it mean that the church might want to consider that as the entrance to the sanctuary and not use the present loop on the front of the property? I don't know. These are just, I'm just saying, when I look at the site, these are questions that I have, or maybe you have. Soil permeability, we talked about this a little bit before. We have to make sure we have the right ratio there. And how prominent does the church wish to have the church building on the site? If there's something between Main Street and the church, is that considered taking away from the prominence of the church building on the site, depending on what it is? Like if it were gardens, would that be looked at differently than if that were a 2 or 3 story building? I can't answer those questions. Only you can answer those questions. These are things I think of when I look at the site. So what is the church trying to accomplish? So I was told that, okay, looking at leasing, which we've talked about, and also talking about the property itself. And so there are 2 sections of the property. And by the way, the slides I was given, David, I thought they were extremely helpful. They made it much easier to try to compare this. So thank you very much for that. So you've got the rear part of the site, which is close to the amount of land area that was used for Stilltown Village, which is 48 units of 3 buildings that are 3 stories high. But we were further separated from our neighbors. So the amount of buffer between us and our neighbors probably is going to be very important. And I have to assume the only right way to get there is by extending Virginia Ave if that were to be built. And of course, that would have to be, at the moment, I don't remember who owns Virginia Ave, but, or is that a public right of way? But if the municipality mandated that it shall be built as part of the property, it's eligible for computation of tax credits. If that doesn't happen, then you can't generate tax credits to offset the cost to build it, which building something of that length is, as we can imagine, quite expensive. Also there, of course, there's the front part of the existing property. We already talked about aspects of that, because we have to, not just the use, but you know what the appearance looks like when we're done. A third area to look at is how feasible is a partnership. So one thing to consider is, well, who is the developer or developers? Okay, And when PETRA Community Housing decided to go ahead with the Steeltown Village project, the board made it really clear. They said, we are not going to co-develop. We knew the weakest link of the whole project was PETRA Community Housing, because we hadn't done this before. If you haven't done this before, nobody wants to trust you. They want to know who they're doing business with. Well, having done one and been successful, that changes things. But at that time, our president of the board and the board said no, because they didn't want to water down our mission. Our mission was of paramount importance. We couldn't create real affordable housing with a lot of amenities. We weren't going to let someone else make it into something else. Your general partners, and typically what happens is a developer creates a general partner. So in this case, Steeltown Village is owned by a for-profit partnership. The board of PETRA Community Housing creates a limited liability for-profit corporation. I become the executive director on behalf of the for-profit general partner, and now I share that partner agreement with my limited partner, which is my investor. So this is the way to get tax credits, because if PETRA Community Housing, which is a not-for-profit developer, receive the tax credits, I can't do anything with tax credits. I'm not paying taxes. The only entity that desperately wants tax credits is an entity that has a major tax liability. So therefore, my investor, in this case is a bank, who created an arm of the bank as their investor arm, and they don't want to pay taxes, just like, well, when we do our tax return, if we can get a deduction or a credit on our tax return, we're going to go for a credit every time, because that's a dollar for dollar reduction in our tax liability. That's what the investor wants. So for example, Steeltown, there's one general partner and one investor, because that simplifies it. Most general partners don't want any other partners because it's already so complicated with the IRS. They don't want any more. Same with the investors. Unless it's syndicated. Now, whoops, I went ahead. If it's syndicated, that means I have one broker I'm dealing with, and they may have multiple investors. Some I may never even see because they just want to invest in some project in Pennsylvania or something like that. The funding sources for Steeltown, we got a little over $1 million from Chester County. That's how much Chester County wanted to see it built, because it's serving public policy for what we're able to accomplish. And of course, the other thing we have to look at is, whenever you're considering a partnership, are you going to be able to have, is your mission going to be furthered by the partnership, whatever it is, whoever you're in partnership with. And then the fourth item of the proposal I looked at is, so we can definitely look at the rear of the property. If we do, then I don't know how you can not do it without extending Virginia Ave. Maybe there should be consideration of limited development on the front of the property, maybe significant development. I don't know. Only you can, tell me what you want to do. I'm guessing the borough would support creation of a community center with the housing, which means that agencies, offices, not retail, but offices could occur in the plan with a robust supportive services. The services plan we submitted for Steeltown, we have like a dozen partners. and they're basically all involved with the PARN meetings that occur at your church and so forth, are wonderful partners and are providing whatever services are appropriate to support the residents that we have. And the last thing, of course, is every year for the past number of years, 3, 4, 5, once a year, there is a timing period for submitting applications. Everything is getting thrown off because of the COVID-19. My guess, and no one's put this to writing because no one's given us guidance. We're really it's unclear what is going to happen regarding tax credits this year. My guess is they will defer and not accept applications this year. But I don't know that. No one said that. So normally it would be July when I have to submit a pre-application. And I have no idea when that's going to happen. So that was the presentation. And we can go back, try to answer questions. I hope that was informative. And I can return back to the other screen or whatever you want.
Thank you, Steve. What questions do we have?
One, just more of a comment than a question. And this would be directed towards Steve. If the church were to move in this direction, from our side of things, there's no way we would have been able to make a July deadline for LIHTC at this point anyway. So regardless of this year's deadlines, I don't see us making those.
In other words, Mark, you mean you don't think the church would have been able to organize and make decisions on this project in that timetable given the COVID situation? Given the COVID situation, we would need to be working on the local level. We would also have to do some pro forma work at the district and conference level. And in order to move things forward under these circumstances, I would be surprised. Yeah, okay. Steve, I have a question, and it kind of relates to slide 8, but not specifically. We've heard the term workforce housing as a category. Is that, how does that word interface with what you did at Steeltown or what you said in the presentation?
The Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency uses that term all the time. And the way that they use it, they say that when tax credit housing is built, it becomes affordable to the workforce. So when you build tax credit housing, every apartment is at 60% of area median income or less to be allowed to be built. Now let me explain what I just said. Think of the median income for a community, let's say Phoenixville. Median is that midpoint between the lowest and the highest. That's the median, not the average. It'll tend to be close to the average, but it's the median, it's the midpoint, okay? And the IRS has said that to be eligible for tax credits, that you have to serve so many at 50% of area median income, so many at 60, but never over 60% of area median income. So 60% area median income is 60% of 100%, depending on the size of the family. Because that's going to vary if it's a one-person family, two-person, and so forth. So it's a very complicated process to say, okay, well, what is the median income? Well, it depends on Well, you have to know the size of the apartment that you're building to know, okay, this is the median for that size apartment. Therefore, rents have to be no greater than 30% of what they can afford. Oh, so what can they afford? But whoever you're renting to has to be no more than 60% or no more than 50% of the area median income. And oh, by the way, if you're really going to serve the community, you're going to have a certain amount, and they're pushing this harder and harder every year, a certain amount, no greater than 20% of the area median income. So at Stilltown, I have a substantial number that are earning up to 20% of area median income, so many up to 50, and so many up to 60% of area median income. Well, if I'm making apartments available for persons up to 20%, they're probably permanently disabled, right? I mean, otherwise, how can they make ends meet? And they're just getting by and no more. Well, I refer to that as affordable housing. I made it affordable, and I do that with rent subsidies like these veterans. These veterans are the reason they're in this program. They come to me from the Coatesville office is because they've been homeless. They're not earning much money, and they're struggling to get by, but it's affordable because I have a rent subsidy for them. So they've agreed to certain terms to be in that program. They have a case worker, etc. I consider them affordable. But if you're not getting one of these special rent subsidies, then I'm saying, okay, sure. The rest of them, I will call them workforce, because those people are earning a wage, they're in the workforce. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. In other words, you don't consider categories of housing, veteran or senior or workforce. You would rent to all of those people depending on the formulas you need to put in place to maximize your tax credits, et cetera.
Yes. Now, I can't, I'm allowed to have a high proportion of disabled in a general occupancy, or I can make it elderly only. So, for example, for Stilltown, I have a high proportion of disabled, but it's not all disabled because I'm not allowed to do that, but I have to call it general occupancy. So I end up with a mix.
Yep. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. You mentioned that community center. Is that part of what is required for the housing, that there has to be a community center nearby, or?
Okay, so every development has to have a community room so that people can just go hang out. Like the community room we have at Stilltown has a full function kitchen if they want to have that available to them, a large television, seating for over 60 people, so forth. So we can have activities there. That's not a community center. Community center is going to be staffed by one or more agencies providing certain services. You do not need a community center to be funded. It's not necessary. What is necessary is to do something so outstanding as to get funded. So look, think of it this way. Years ago, when the Bard Complex, which is senior only, and Flag House, senior only in Spring City, when they were made application for, it was an application, basically fill in the blank. You fill in all the blanks, you submit it to HUD, federal government, they like it, then the federal government goes in the bond market so it can be built. the federal government guarantees rents will be affordable. That's what happened. That program is gone, doesn't exist. So now think of a blank sheet of paper. So Petra Community Housing and every other developer that's trying to do a tax credit property starts with a blank sheet of paper and says, hey, I don't know what everybody else is proposing, but what I'm putting on my piece of paper here is better than anybody else. And it's so good. You're going to have to score it so high, you need to fund it. That's what every developer does. And that's why anyone who asks, I say every developer almost across the board is a type A. Some are triple type A personalities. Seriously, they love control. They thrive on it. And almost every investor I've worked with or met, they worry about everything. There isn't something they can't, get concerned over. Whereas developers are willing to take risks. You have the risk taker with the one that worries. It's a strange situation.
Steve, would you be able to share this presentation with us?
Yeah.
Okay, if you could email it to me, I can share it out with the group.
Yeah, I create a PDF version.
Yep.
So if at any time you want changes or I can do that. So I can definitely email that to you. Sure.
That would be great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'd like to suggest that the existing church facility could serve as a community center. It does so downtown. Our old building is now a community center with some modification. I think the church, the existing building could be used as a community center. The other question I was interested in, if you rebuilt Steeltown, what you said was fittable on our plot, would you be able to fill the occupancy immediately, or is the demand that high? Is that what you were suggesting in the presentation?
The demand is through the roof. We can't keep up with the demand. We did not hire a big marketing company when we advertised. We did what was legally required in the newspapers. We had stuff on billboards for like 2 weeks, maybe 2 in town. And we had 120, 200 visitors on a Saturday and Sunday. And as I said, we had to close the applications after 2 months. I haven't reopened it, and I'm still going off the waiting list. The demand is incredible. The only affordable or workforce housing, whatever category you want to give it, that's been built in Phoenixville in the last 20 years is Steeltown Village. The demand for this housing cannot be underestimated. The Coatesville VA has said, and the Housing Authority of Chester County has said, basically the demand for our disabled military service veterans is inexhaustible. So however many apartments I'm willing to set aside for their benefit, that's how many they can fill. And I wouldn't say it's inexhaustible. My market company wouldn't say that, but there's been no, when people move out for whatever reason, there's been no difficulty refilling apartments.
Okay, as a member of a church and a Christian, and I know I have a feeling that what you're saying is absolutely true, and I know that the Episcopal House is full, and I know that St. Peter's is full, and I know that the areas that have been set aside for disabled people is full. You know, doing something of social good is important to the mission of the church. And what we hope to get out of this is some proportion of the appraised value of the land as it is. A tax credit doesn't do us any good, so that we can do more of this kind of work in the future as a more vital and vibrant community. It makes it very appealing to me as a member of the congregation and what I think we're here to accomplish. It's not just a clubhouse for the members. It should do good in the community, and we have a long history of service to Phoenixville. It's extended over hundreds of years, and I think this is an important legacy for this leadership group to consider and look at. As you mentioned, there are thousands of things that can go wrong in getting this thing accomplished. And I just think we work through them until we get to the point where it's viable or it's not. Or that's what I would like to encourage the group to think about.
There are like 4 items that you mentioned that probably would bear commenting on. I'm trying to remember what the 4th one was. Oh yeah, the elderly. The legacy. The fact that you've made such a commitment over such a long period of time, if that becomes known, if the church is somehow involved with furthering the success of the project, that's the type of thing that the Housing Finance Agency looks for. They look for long-standing commitment, success, and real partnerships, not partnerships just on paper for convenience, but that things have been thought through. So that's all very positive. Dollars over time, as I said, I'm sure there are ways. I don't think it could be done through site control, but I'm sure there are ways of generating income for the church, and that is what my tax accountant and my development advisor would have to weigh in on. The community center, if there's a few years ago, the Housing Finance Agency of the state said every project has to have its own community center or community building. Let's call it a community building. You don't need a full-fledged community center. Then, more recently, they said, well, but if you can share services, then you don't have to build one. That makes even more sense. So what you're saying would probably be very appealing to the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, the funder. And last, you mentioned Episcopal House, so forth. Those are elderly only developments. The last time there was a tax credit application in Phoenixville, it was for an elderly only development in Phoenixville, well-respected developer. They used the same development advisor that I used, and they did not get funded. That was last year. They have resubmitted again. This is year number 2. They're resubmitting, and they're waiting to hear. Now, the COVID-19, I'm sure, is going to delay the announcement, whatever. But they've done all their work. They've resubmitted a second time. They're just waiting to hear. So in August, they probably would have known, or maybe they still will. I don't know.
Is that the 30,000 Corporation project across from St. Peter's?
Hankin Group.
Just,
The Hankin Group, the old DPW site.
and that land was donated by the borough?
Yes.
Is that the one we're talking about? Okay.
Yes. And I mean, they wanted land donated because as we learned that land costs cannot generate tax credits. So that made the project even sweeter from the point of view of the developer. But it wasn't funded. Why wasn't it funded? Well, there could be any number of reasons, but when you compare creating general occupancy for 1, 2, and 3 bedroom, for disabled, for veterans, for large families, in other words, a mix of what exists in your community versus elderly only, the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency absolutely in their scoring system wants to fund something that affects the whole community, that looks like the community. They just score it much higher. So I'm not saying Hankin Group did anything wrong, but and there were some elderly only funded in the state when they weren't the last time that they submitted. But you're more successful if you're reaching out and impacting the community more so than less so. Did I explain it to help you understand?
You got me confused there. You said
I'm sorry.
they didn't fund the mixed community that reflected the community norms, but they might have funded an elderly only.
No, the opposite.
Just opposite that. Okay.
They did not fund elderly
Okay.
only. There is a shortage of affordable workforce housing in this county. And if you're creating something to help small families that are struggling and the disabled, because there aren't very many years ago, Chester County said PETRA is the only one doing anything to help the disabled. I don't know if that's true. I was told that years ago. I'm not saying if it's true or not, just what I was told. So if you're doing those things, that's what funders want to fund.
And the other thing you didn't mention in the presentation is the walk to school aspect of our property. It's contingent to the schools, so I think it has a lot of pluses.
Now, if we were to, the more families we have in the property, I 100% agree with you, the more value with the school. Now, I've been talking with the superintendent, saying the next project we do, we want to partner even closer with the school system, the school district. So that is, there are a lot of discussions that have been occurring there where we're trying to make that connection. So again, the walkability, look at all the ball fields and so forth close by. So yeah, there's a lot of pluses. All depends. Now, if this was, let's say, only housing for elderly and disabled, and that was it, then having a school nearby really isn't going to be much of a asset to the project. It all depends on the composition of who's to benefit in the development.
Hey, Steve, this is Ed Hook. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
A couple questions. The scoring system seems like if you have small families, vets, disabled, and elderly, that's a good scoring mix. Who does all the math of the workforce versus affordable versus who pay? They're not all paying the same thing because they're all coming to the table with different incomes, right? And we're allowing them to pay different rent based on their income. So who does that? A project manager? It's got to be someone who's full-time. So when you do that marketing and you have 150 people come on the weekend, that's 150 different ways they get income, right? Who does all
You
that?
are so right. Okay. So my staff and I do that. So at Steeltown, we don't have one waiting list. We have like 7 waiting lists because all the categories that people come to us.
Yep.
So we have to create a very detailed spreadsheet so that depending on their area median income, depending on the size of the family, depending on how many bedrooms, we have to make sure that we never violate all the rules. And it's so easy to get in trouble with these IRS rules. Now, all this is laid out in advance in the pre-application. That's part of the feasibility. So what we did for Steeltown is we responded to a request for proposals from the Housing Authority in advance, months in advance of even submitting our pro forma. We're successful in getting a commitment for rent subsidy for some of our residents, not all, because we said, no way are we going to have everybody subsidized. We don't want that. Absolutely don't want that. And so we could prove that for all these different incomes, we could still meet all the requirements and have it affordable, whether they're workforce persons, whether they're extremely low income, so forth. And then you have to maintain that over time. So we are the property manager and the general partner for Steeltown.
Okay. And one last comment. You talked about walkability and all these things. Friends of ours who are retired thought they'd never like to live near a college, but it turns out they love it because there's plays going on, there's music going on, there's all kinds of things that they thought, that's really nice that we get a lot of things that I would think that disabled and elderly and vets would like to go to the Valley Forge College to see some of those events, right? Maybe not small families. Another plus is that the college is right there to put on a lot of plays and musical events too.
And I totally agree. Now, what we did without any state or federal monies at all, this is all fundraising, we purchased a 15-passenger handicap accessible bus. So we can take up to 2 wheelchairs on this. And we're not competing with other like Rover, other pre-made government-assisted bus routes to get to your doctor and so forth. No, this is for special events. This is once a week going to different communities for shopping, go to the restaurant, just to be out, whatever, at a minimal transit cost to the residents. So these are the types of things that we think are necessary for a high quality of life. So I'm in total agreement with what you said.
Thanks again for your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, this is Bill. I have one question. On slide 5, you talked about subsidies. Are the tax credits the only subsidies that you were talking about, or were there others?
Oops. Is slide 5 on the screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So the question was, am I talking about, okay, subsidies. The permanent financing was the, let's use Steeltown as the example. Permanent financing was a $2 million loan. Construction financing, I started paying on the construction financing, it rolled into the permanent, so it was all one loan instead of separate, because that's what my bank wanted and that's what I wanted. Development subsidies. So one of those development subsidies was $10 million that was committed to me by the investor. Well, it always leaves a gap. 50,000 of that came from the Phoenixville Community Health Foundation. I mentioned $1 million from the county. So those are the main sources. And then I still had a problem because I was then required to do something on the other side of the street. I wasn't planning on it. I was required by the municipality to do it. I didn't have the money. I couldn't close. The project was in trouble. So I went after we were the first developer in the state to go after a special loan program through the Housing Finance Agency, and that closed my gap.
And then once the steel town was built, the income that you get from the residents and any help that they get keeps it running?
Yeah, so it depends on the tenant. If the tenant is elderly, they're getting Social Security. If the tenant is a military service veteran, they're getting what's known as a VASH voucher through the Housing Authority. So they sign a lease with me, and they sign an agreement with me and the Housing Authority to get the voucher. So as long as they maintain the requirements that are put there by the VA, they get the rent subsidy. Now, I assume everyone here has heard of Section 8, okay, which is rent subsidy. Well, VASH is Section 8 for a military service veteran. It is. That's exactly what it is. But it's only for military service veterans. And then I have permanently disabled. They're getting subsidy for them, but only for disabled persons. But that's also a voucher, and that would be what we normally think of as Section 8. However, there are two kinds of Section 8. The type of Section 8 that most of us have heard horror stories about is a Section 8 that stays with the tenant. So the tenant can go wherever they want, and the Section 8 goes with them if the landlord is willing to accept it. What I have, except for one apartment, I have project-based Section 8, which means the Section 8 voucher stays with the project, stays with the landlord. Let's say I have to evict so-and-so, and I've evicted quite a few already because they just didn't want to be a good neighbor, okay? And I don't put up with that. So when they lost their apartment due to action by the court in my favor, they lost their subsidy. They no longer had a rent subsidy. They lost their apartment and their subsidy. So those are the types of rent subsidy that I get with that apartment. Now, some of my tenants are single head of households with families, and they're struggling. So much so, they're having trouble paying 60% area median income. So we did fundraising. We sold engraved bricks around town. We went to the foundation, the Health Foundation. We got a grant there as well. And together, we're providing 2 years worth of partial rent subsidy, but just for them because they proved to us how they're striving to improve their income, their education, etc. And then it's gone. They have to, then they know, it's in writing. If they don't accomplish their goals, I'm not going to put up with them not paying the rent. They're going to be gone. So we're doing whatever we can to help people break the cycle of poverty. And it appears to be working. It's something. It's not, it's not perfect, but it's something.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve, based on what you know about our property and the needs in the community, would you think our project, if constructed and proposed properly, would have a a higher success percentage than your 1 in 5?
Yeah, I'm unwilling personally. My board backs me up because it's such a not just a commitment of time, resources, myself, staff, financial resources. We're a small organization. I don't go after it unless I think we have a chance to hit a home run. In other words, if we don't get it year 1, I'm confident we'll get it by year 2. Otherwise, I don't want to go for it. I think because of the walkability factor, because of the strength of the history of the church, most recently supporting the efforts of PARN by having monthly meetings, and much of this still is the location axiom, but you can't just do that. You've got to tie in. If we can continue to create a strong bridge with Tower Health, if we can create a stronger bridge with the school system, especially if we have 2 or 3 bedroom units, then I think the answer is yes, because unless you create enough impact, you don't score real well. So if we can pull all those things together, and we take the word partnership very, very seriously with real solid partners, and we've been able to glean quite a few in the Phoenixville area with the church and all the connections that you have. Yes, I think it's possible, but of course the numbers have to work. You know, what are the costs? What type of heating and cooling systems? I mean, just the myriad of decisions. But the answer is yes. I think if I didn't think it was possible, then when I was first approached on this, I would have said, I'll do a short, simple overview, but you wouldn't have seen the effort into the slide presentation that you did if I thought that, you know, it's just a nice, simple academic exercise. It's not simple, but I thought it was worth, I mean, I felt a lot of sincerity in the overture, and so I responded accordingly with something that I think deserves serious consideration.
That's great. Thank you.
Hey, Steve, just to follow up on that question and your response there, what, in your opinion, hurts our chances or would be a detriment to us?
The zoning district is very restrictive. The costs for building the Virginia Avenue extension is going to be quite expensive. I mean, you have to understand, when you're creating affordable or workforce housing, nobody says, well, we have this standard for luxury housing, but for you, we only require this standard. Never happens. The opposite happens. As I said, the energy value we put into these homes and so forth, it exceeds any luxury housing, I'm sure. And we're building Energy Star version 3 with reduced HERS. If you're in the business, you know what I'm talking about. It's a very, very expensive standard to adhere to. So yes, I think so. You know your neighbors better than I do. If the Borough Council gets behind this project and thinks it's good for the community, that is a huge plus. If the opposite, then all we can propose is residential and a community garden, nothing else. We can't have any other partners on site. If you have other partners on site, we move closer to the health housing, social determinants of health connection, which everybody wants to fund. They all want to fund that. So when Tower Health said to me, absolutely, you're the first one that's come to us and is clearly presenting a plan for how we can partner, they were real happy to say that. I was real happy to hear that. But for that to actually happen, there's a lot of thought we have to put into that. That's not simple. That involves a lot of partners. So if we can get all that goes beyond the land, the site. So there's just a lot of homework we have to do. Can we do it? Yeah, I think we can do it.
Hey, Steve, this is Ed. Go ahead, Tom.
Steve, if we didn't get the third story, I think that'll be a big zoning hurdle. Will the project be economic on our plot?
The zoning we have today, I refer to as performance zoning standards. It's not so much, and I know there's a height standard. I believe three-story is allowed. I don't see that as a restriction if the borough council likes it. This is still, it's called land development. Any development like this in the borough with this many units needs land development approval, which means the planning commission is going to review it and then the borough council has to approve it. So whatever is proposed, even if there's no conditional use requested, it still goes to borough council, no matter what. So if borough council wants the project, they will approve the project. And it is allowed. You can go up 3 stories. Now I'd be reticent to go higher than that because I think it would be inappropriate. I think it would be counterproductive to that community. This is not the downtown. Okay, we were looking on Church Street and we're talking to the owners of a property on Church Street, and that was much higher. And if it wasn't for someone with big bucks in their pocket, we would have an option today to that property. But all of a sudden they showed up. They have money like we don't have. And so they were able to negotiate, control the site for a period of time. And so I'm no longer looking at that site. So I think we can make it work on this site with 3 stories. Gene Crack has been extremely helpful. So something like this, there would be private conversations with Gene Crack and others to get a feel for what the council is likely to approve. So you want to try to submit something that has a chance of success instead of blindly just hoping it has a chance of success. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
As long as you don't, and I was under the impression that 3 stories might be a problem. If we can do that much, I think it'll be economic. I think that's fine.
I think there is the higher we go, the more the possibility of pushback from the neighbors.
Sure.
The greater the amount of buffer, in my opinion, the less the pushback, unless it's perceived that there's going to be a whole lot of large families there, because many single family owners really don't want to be living close to, they don't care if you've got fences or whatever. They're not real excited about being that close to where a lot of children are. Okay, so there has to be a balance.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned the back property and the front property. Is that something that you do all at once, or are you talking about two different projects? The back, it was this 3-story apartments for working force and disabled. What about that front piece if we want to do that? Can that be one project, or do you have to do 2 separate projects?
With the amount of effort that's involved, it would probably be advantageous to do them both as one project. The front is actually very, very small. To build something on just an acre is difficult. So for example, we talked about soil permeability. Let's say the rear is very substantially impermeable surface. You've got roofing, asphalt, driveway, whatever, sidewalks. It's not permeable. It doesn't recharge the aquifer. Well, if the front was considered part of that property, then the percents would change as to the amount of land area that was permeable. When the Bard complex in Spring City was approved, which is elderly only, Phoenixville Homes, which is what this company was called before it became Petra Community Housing, with the former name, it wasn't allowed to renovate that existing old vacant factory building because of the permeability ratios. So behind it, there was a small sliver of land owned by Pico. So the developer arranged for a forever lease of that piece of land to be considered part of the larger property. I mean, it's tiny, but that was enough to make the permeability ratios work, even though nothing really changed. It's on paper that it's permeable. So my tenants park on it. So I throw stone down, but I don't asphalt it because now I've made it impermeable. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's such a complicated project. If the front were used at the same time as the back as one project, even if it's a horseshoe shape, whatever, I think it only creates advantages to the rear of the property being more usable. It doesn't rule it out, but it gives you more options, I guess. And you don't know these things until you really get into it and you explore all this with your engineer. And we have a soil scientist that we use, et cetera. And we you have to get core samples and analysis, and then your plan changes as you do one of these projects. Your plan is constantly being refined as new information becomes available.
So what you're saying, am I hearing you correctly? What you're saying is that the front piece of the property could be valuable to the project without us having to do any kind of construction on it?
Yes, it's possible. Or what does the church want to do with the front? If the church says, for example, that, yeah, if you had a 2 or 3 story, even if it was a small building on the front, that'd be great. If the church says, oh, no, that would destroy the view from Main Street to the church, which we need to maintain, well, then maybe they would be gardens, or some of these decisions, the church has to make the parameters first, then the developer can figure out what the options are.
Right, but the front piece of land could be valuable without us having to do anything putting a construction on it.
Yes, yeah. If it were associated with the rear,
right,
then it creates more opportunity to build in the rear.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. Good. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, one of the ideas that we talked about previously was moving the bulk of our parking to the front portion of the property and taking the back portion of our parking lot and have it potentially be part of the part of this project that, you know, could be used as permeable land if that would be possible, among other things, I guess.
Yeah. That would probably simplify the construction process. It'd probably make it easier to make it happen, and any ways that the community space within the church could be used also would probably add value to the overall project. I mean, it's a wonderful space that you have today where Parn meets. You know, you got a lot of agencies there that use that whole room. It's very effective use of that space.
So how are we doing, guys? Any more questions that anybody has? Then I'm going to suggest we thank Steve very much, and maybe the rest of us stay on for a minute just to regroup, or a few minutes to regroup.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
All right, that'll be fine. So I'll be what I will do is I will send you that that slide presentation as a PDF, and if the church wants to do something further, I'll be hearing from you.
Yep.
Okay.
And Steve,
thank you so much.
I agree with what
Thank you.
everybody else has said. It's been extremely valuable. Thank you
Right.
for taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now. Okay, let's go here. Get rid of that. It's not going away.
He had control.
You're
He has
stuck
to
with
turn
us.
off this share screen.
Okay,
There we
there we go.
Thank you.
That did something there. There it is. Leave meeting. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Long, thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
It certainly is a lot to think about.
Good presentation.
I can honestly say I think I've changed my view of what's going on by listening, although there's still an awful lot of decisions to be discussed and talked about, you know. I mean,
it's a huge, huge project.
it's unbelievable.
One thing I would suggest, if people have not seen in person the Steel Town project, go and take a look.
Where is it, Mark?
It's on Mason Street, adjacent to the ballpark.
Oh, okay.
Oh, is that where? Oh, okay.
Is it behind Episcopal House or?
No, it's up where you used to live.
Yeah.
It's way up where your first old house was.
Oh.
No, your first old house was, you were over next to the hops, right?
Yeah.
It's on the other side of Nut Road.
Oh, where?
Yeah. By Episcopal House, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
up that way, other side, right. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Okay.
By Wheatland Street.
Yes.
Yes, it's at Mason and Wheatland.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, I was on the wrong side of the road.
We're all churches now.
It's down the street from Superior Beverage and the VFW, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, we don't know where it is.
Guess replaced.
Well, one thing I'm struggling with, you know, I'm so over my head. Robert Peters, when he called me last, and you saw this in my email, he's ready to have this developer, WODA, and if you've looked up their site, this is what they do, meet with us and the mayor, and if the mayor gives us his blessing, WODA's ready to go ahead, to put together the proposal, to put in, to try to get So he hasn't talked about tax credits or developers or loans or any level of detail like we saw tonight. And he's acting like what my takeaway was, we're such an appealing project. He just wants to go, 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 right? He's got WODA lined up who would build it, and they're ready to go.
That's that AAA personality that he talked about earlier.
I wrote that
Best
down.
project, I'm ready to go.
I wrote that down. He is a AAA personality.
See, and I just don't think we have enough. We haven't talked about this enough to say, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, we certainly got a lot more information tonight than what, but there's, in my mind, there's still a whole lot to talk about and discuss before we say to somebody, yeah, go ahead.
And the advantage of having the guy who just talked with us is that he's gone through this whole process locally. I know that other guy has done things like around the Northeast and different parts, but the presentation tonight, the guy's already done this in Phoenixville,
right,
with the powers that be, and I think that that's appealing.
Yeah, we have something to compare our project with.
Yeah.
And they're the managing company of the project once it's built. So I don't say hands off from our standpoint. I mean, we're a partner to be a service and or a community of faith to the individuals that move in, but our responsibility isn't to manage the property and maintain it and all those other things there. That's what they're there for.
That's what's in it for them.
Yeah. Well, I have a question for Mark. So where does the conference and the church fit into this? Do we act as a separate entity, or do we have to get permission to move ahead with this through the conference? And what part do they have in this whole scheme?
The person who actually can answer that is George, because he has been on the committee that handles that. Any project that involves a value of more than 15% of the property has to be given approval and the blessing of the District Committee on Church Location. And one of the things to really have going for us, regardless of who we would go with, if we did something like this, is that our incoming district superintendent, the one who will be with us for 6 years starting on July 1st, is the pastor of the Garden Church in Lansdowne that has worked with Simpson Senior Services on the development of 2 projects in Lansdowne on church property. So we would have to go through a couple hoops there, but the person we would have holding the hoop is saying, come on, you can do it, you can do it. George, could you add anything to that?
The district board on church and building, if they're presented with information that indicates that the church has their ducks in a row, they're very, likely to give their approval. This is not, there's kind of 2 situations where the district board gets involved. One is a church that is looking to expand its own facilities, or a church that's getting ready to throw in the towel. We're not in either of those categories. We would be looking for basically approval to dispose of a portion of the property, which would enable us to continue to function as a church for their foreseeable future. And having sat on that committee for a number of years, I am pretty certain that would receive favorable approval from the district board.
Okay, to play devil's advocate, if they said no, we're dead in the water? the project?
No.
Yes.
Well,
Oh.
yes and no.
Never mind. Who's
You're
right?
You're stalled in the
Go
water.
ask your mother.
Exactly. Ed, I'm going to
You
say
would have,
that. And
you would
turn off
have the right
recorder,
to
okay?
appeal.
That's when we go across the river and talk to the bishop and
Oh,
say,
so-
hey,
okay.
you live here, you're part of this community. We need
Gotcha.
you to get behind us.
Okay.
And we
You're
need
calling
to
a
guide
favor.
Michael in first because he's louder and he can talk more.
So you call it a favor.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically. Yes.
No, I mean, the district board then reports to the conference office. And there have been situations in the past where a local church was denied at the district level and then essentially appealed it to the conference level and ultimately got approval. So if the district board says no, it doesn't mean it's a done deal. I think one of the really major hurdles is internal within the congregation of being willing to let go.
Oh, that's why yes.
Yeah, that's why this is going to take a while.
I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle, is to get people to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it and why it's okay. But I find that's going to be the biggest hurdle.
And
I think too, I think even this committee or administrative council represents a broad spectrum of the congregation. So I don't think that that it would necessarily be polarizing people. I think that with good information and dialogue with people, I think that they would understand why we want to do this and what we want to do.
And I think we would need to take the same approach that Steve Cambick was outlining, of pointing out that if this were done, and it still remains an if, we would have to do it as part of a wider approach and say, listen, what is our ministry? Why are we doing this? And how do we do this as part of everything?
Well, especially if the church is going to get involved in doing something like using our property for like the community center or something like that. If the church is willing to do that, that becomes part of the ministry of the church to this project.
And we've already talked about doing meals there on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
Which has aspects of that, but expanding it. I mean, he talked about Parn meeting there. Well, yes, Parn meets there, but there are also exercise classes there. The Orchid Society meets there, does whatever they do. I mean,
Can you explain what Parn is? I missed that.
That's the Phoenixville Area Resource Network. It's a monthly meeting on Tuesday mornings where social service organizations from throughout the area get together and share information on their resources and their programming and what they can make available to the community as a whole.
Where do they meet?
Fellowship Hall.
Oh, okay.
And it's a networking organization. It's a wonderful group, and they pay their rent. And
how big is it?
Up to 150 people of them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
For now, that's a high point of meetings, but it's usually less than that. But it's a pretty big crowd.
Yeah, I'd say.
So since this is a finance committee meeting, I didn't hear anything about what the financial benefits were to the church, because I thought that when we started this whole project was kind of to meet the gap that we've been seeing every year in the giving versus the expenses. So
Well, I think that's the hard part of the discussion for me is how do you monetize the land and meet the mission of the church? I would think, in my mind, you got an appraisal and you said, well, we'll discount it as part of our contribution to the project. But yeah, to be selfish, the value of that land would expand the endowment and make the church more financially strong for the future, and hopefully fund more projects in the community, and allow us to survive in a comfortable fashion and maintain the building that we have, which is expensive to maintain right now. And as a trustee, we're ignoring a lot of projects because we spend our money on, paying salaries and our apportionment. And, we would be in better financial shape if we could add to the endowment and use some of the earnings from that to keep everything strong. And it expands everything that we do with the possibility of, paying the apportionment every month. It makes it easier for all those things to happen.
He seemed to be leaning away from the whole leasing the land as opposed to selling the land.
Well, the concept there was a medical arts building, who would somebody like a kidney dialysis center who would want they didn't want to rent at the mall. They would come in there and build their own building, which they would have, and they would lease the land from us. But it was always just a concept, and I don't think we got far enough along to make that a reality. But the community housing thing fits so nicely into the Christian mission that I think it's just a natural to move forward to. It's very, very explainable, and who could be against housing for workforce or elderly or disabled people? I mean, or a mix of the group. I mean, I think it's
that we're against that. It's the fact that we're using our property to do it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
I
think if the leadership, if this committee and the trustees, if you guys believe in it, and I mean all of you, I mean, if we can move as a group, we're irresistible. But if this is just a half-baked idea that with nothing behind it, then nobody's gonna. I'd prefer to let the land just sit. It'll only be more valuable next year, and if we don't get it done, some generation ahead of us will get it done.
I had shared my observations from my real estate background with Tom probably over a year ago when this discussion first started about the difficulty of being able to find somebody who was willing to develop on leased land. Because in situations like that, the lenders are less likely to be excited about it because the developer doesn't have absolute control of the land. They don't have title to it. And that's why I felt quite a while ago that although I recognize that there probably would be some opposition to selling the land, that would make a much cleaner deal. Now, what Steve was talking about tonight is the fact that, that the land cost is not eligible for credits, and there's probably some way of getting around that in terms of, whether we get a longer term payout or an upfront payout for the land. But, the longer term payout would theoretically be like a lease payment, but it would be in form of, you know, whether sharing profits or however they wanted to structure it. But I think it's easier for a developer to have that control of, you know, they've got a deed that outlines the metes and bounds of the property and title ultimately in their name. Because from a practical standpoint, you know, if 12 years down the road, the project went sour and the bank forecloses, they don't want to be written up in the newspaper as being foreclosing on a church owned property.
And I think subdivision and sale is a lot cleaner for the church too. There's no residual risk there. You know, should the project run into problems, it's their nickel and not ours. And I mean, I think members will be required or asked to serve on the boards of these community development corporations to manage and develop I think we should expect to do that. But I think that should be the limit of our, you know, obligation to the entity that takes over the property. I think it's cleaner and it's just a lot safer for us.
Okay, are we going to have a congregational vote or anything like that to have full approval to do a project like this? Or is the fact that we would recommend it to somebody else is enough to make it happen? What's the process?
I think a full congregational vote would be highly recommendable, highly advisable.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're planning on a congregational meeting coming up whenever we get together again, and we can, you know, you don't have to have the full plan at that point, but
no,
I think you just explain the direction we're going into and see if opposition develops on it. Because if opposition does develop to it, it gives you something to work on to overcome. So. Okay,
well, all right.
The other point that I would wonder about, and is the Montessori school. I'm not sure what their reaction would be and if we would lose them as tenants. I don't think any of us can answer that, but
no, you can't.
We need to consider.
I'd love to keep them, but you know, if the payoff for the sale of land is as big as we, you know, if it's $1 million, we can lease those classrooms pretty fast. I'm pretty sure about that.
I think we could, but yeah.
But they're a long tenant, and I'm in favor of keeping them happy, but
I don't get.
I'm probably the only one.
No. The limit to happiness.
Yeah, I want everybody to be happy.
Yeah, there's a limit to happiness.
Yeah.
Would it be advisable at all just to have a casual conversation with the school and say, this is some of the stuff we're considering. We want you to be aware of it.
Yeah, I think when you're ready to talk to the congregation, we'll have the sidebar with Susan and Ed.
Hey Mark, one question I had with the congregational meeting, which, you know, I think you know, I was proposing that we do a couple of months ago, or last month, I guess, right?
Right. It just seems like a long time ago.
Yeah, it seems like months ago, right?
Yeah.
With the congregational vote on the use of the land, is that just a majority rules type of vote, or do you know?
I would have to do some research. I'm not sure. My general rule of thumb, and it's always general, is to try not to go to any kind of major vote on any major issue unless we're already sure how it would go.
Yes, that's a good, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I think this group and the trustees and head council, if we get those people behind us, we will overcome
I think that the
any opposition.
that PowerPoint that Dave and Jay put together lays it out very clearly of why, what the situation is financially and why we began to look at this. And I think that if people see the reasonability of this whole project, I think they'll be on board too, rather than springing it on and saying, here's what we've decided to do.
Is there any way to communicate information to the congregation without physically being together in a congregational meeting?
At this point, I would say to disseminate the PowerPoint that you put together would be the best way to do it. And then to set up a series of times where people could respond to it directly, either through something like this or through conference calls.
Do you think that information on the PowerPoint is something that the normal parishioner is going to understand anyway?
I'm not thinking of the PowerPoint we looked at tonight.
I'm sorry, wrong PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Oh, the one that oh yes, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I do think having this one available as a backup if anyone asks for specifics.
Right. Oh, no, the other one would be a good idea. Yeah. Sorry, wrong PowerPoint.
Short update on the payroll protection plan loan, payroll protection program loan. The Senate approved the expansion of the facility this afternoon. The House is supposed to vote on it tomorrow or Thursday. I think last I heard was tomorrow. It probably will pass. Phoenixville Federal didn't get their facility available until Thursday last week. So we missed out on the first tranche of funds, but we will go in on the second tranche whenever this is approved. And I think they're saying it's going to be 2 more days. So it'll be the end of this week or next week before funds become approved. But our application will be forthcoming whenever the facility opens up with the Small Business Administration.
So what do we see as the way to move forward? We first have to do the congregational meeting and get information out there, and then if the congregation supports it, then, because there was some mention about maybe having a core committee that would handle at least the initial part of this.
What I would suggest is if we all want to at least get this out for general consideration, I think we first send out that PowerPoint in general. Right now, I'm not so sure we're going to be able to hold a congregational meeting. Even if we can meet face-to-face, there are going to be limits on the number of people who can be present. So I don't think we let that hold us back any longer. So I would say let's get that out there. Let's set a time that we can begin to have people respond and go from there. As far as the committee, yes, I would say we definitely need to have a subcommittee, assuming that we move forward on this, to begin sort of being the liaisons to different aspects of what needs to happen. Somebody to work with Steve Cambick, somebody to work with the community, somebody to begin drawing up sort of some of the long-term long-term ministry plan things that could come out of this. And then a couple people at large to just say, wait a minute, this is what you're missing.
Do we feel as a committee that we're all on the same page as exactly how much of a project we'd like to attempt? Or do we still have different views as to how much of the land we're talking about doing something with? I mean, how do you all feel? I know you're all feeling like you'd like to go to bed. All right, I got it.
Well,
I think that
in some ways, developing the back of the property is easier than the front.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So like when we start to talk about this, so that we're all on the same page by saying we're talking about developing the rear of the property. Or is that we're all on the same page with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Tonight was actually the first time I'd heard the possibility of shifting our parking to the front area. I think that makes a lot of sense.
You too.
If we can free up more ground at the back for development to give them buffer zone and stuff like that.
Buffer zone and permeability.
That presentation that Dave Shaw and I attended, that's, I forget what his name was. The one at Eastern, Dave?
Yes, Robert Peters.
Yeah, Robert, he mentioned that just sort of in an offhand way. He said maybe you'd want to take the parking and put it to the front of the church so that people still see the church and people attending the church, and that way you could use more of the back for the project.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering too, if we explored that and possibly made that change, does that alleviate or make our case better to the township and to the powers that be by not having to extend Virginia Avenue or creating another option to extending the road or creating a different entranceway there?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it helps or hurts.
Yeah.
Sneakily, I would propose to the borough, since I believe they own the bed of Virginia Avenue, that is part of their support of the development, that they donate that to the developers and consider that part of the developable area.
Yeah, if they were willing to donate Borough Hall, the old Borough Hall property, why wouldn't they help out with the
good point
of the project?
Okay, that's a good thing. Okay.
Would I have the group's permission to talk this over with a couple people next week? I'm going to be in a Zoom meeting with the mayor and Alan Fagley and a couple other people about other things, and just mention that, hey, we've got something that's, and Lou Beccaria will be in it too.
Sure.
Yes.
I won't go into details.
Yeah, do it.
But
Sure.
okay.
And I'd like to talk to this Church Housing Corporation too, the people that run St. Peter's. I'd like to, they have a community development corporation too, and they're opening a project in Westchester, a pretty large project over there. They're providing the community development shell to develop and manage that property in Westchester. So, you know, they're another group in town. I think we should talk to at least those people that are local, and then you have a choice between PETRA, Church Housing Corporation, and Robert as a developer. I haven't spoken with WUDA. I don't know. I'd like to do some research on them too and understand, you know, what they do and how they do it. And he's motivated by his fee that is paid at the completion of the project. That's kind of why he's, you know, pushing you to get a decision. But I'd like to know that we talked to all three of these community groups before we, or these, at least these two community groups before we make a decision about who to partner with.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
But you know, Beccaria, he's on that task force for low income housing. He's an ally right away, and the mayor is an ally right away. And if they're going to have a political influence on the planning process, you know that. So this, I think just opening the discussion is a good thing.
Yeah, actually, his name helps. The person that we really need to work with is Tamara Luce, who is Lou retired.
Right.
Tamara's taken his place, but he has the name recognition.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like Don Kopich. I mean, he's a community leader. Whether his support would be interesting. And,
right, and
should be solicited too.
Yeah, but Don is. Here we go again. Don is not well, and his wife is not well, so that puts a limit on things now.
Sure.
So where do we go from here, and who does this, who does the steps in the next part of this? I know you said you want to get out the PowerPoint. Is there like a cover letter or something that explains what it is and what to do after you've viewed it, or do you need somebody to help work on that, or what?
Well, I guess my opinion, I think that is the next step, getting the PowerPoint out. I think it does, Dave, warrant some sort of cover letter or some sort of explanation as to why we're sending this out. So I think we could craft an email along with the PowerPoint, kind of clean that up, finish it up. Dave Hayes, you gave me credit previously for the PowerPoint. I don't deserve that yet. Dave Shaw did everything so far.
Yeah.
I have numbers and charts that I want to throw into that. So I plan to do that and add some color and add some content to it. So I think we can finalize that, prepare that to go out, and then I think Mark brought it up. Probably after that goes out, what we could do in lieu of having the congregational meeting is maybe try to set up several of these Zoom meetings, with cross sections of the congregation, 20 people at a time, and try to get the feel the pulse of the group that way, to at least, hear the arguments or, the feedback that they have. And then kind of go from there. So I don't know what everybody thinks of that, but that would be my initial thoughts for rolling this out.
Yeah, I agree.
Considering the situation we're in, that's kind of like that's the only thing we can do.
Other than a Zoom meeting, could it be a recorded video, like Mark does his sermons, rather than?
Yeah. These Zoom meetings do get recorded, so my account has a limited amount of space to record a video, but I can always download it, and we could post it in a YouTube or anywhere else. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I mean, we could, finalize the PowerPoint. We could pick 2 or 3 people who were going to speak at the congregational meeting anyway. Kind of record a presentation, shoot that out to everybody, and then have the subgroup meetings to say, hey, what questions do you have? What else can we tell you? What's your feedback, etc. But maybe that's a better idea.
Well, I think that's worth trying, because I think faith, being that we aren't going to be able to quote face to face, this Zoom is the best opportunity we have to face with the congregation, and that might be a better way to spread the news than just sending that PowerPoint out and hoping people understand it.
So let me reiterate what I think, Jay, what I think you may have said, and Dave, I think you're kind of poking at this a little bit. I found that in my line of business, I do PowerPoint engineering all day long. We build briefing charts all the time, and it's harder to put together a complete set of thoughts in a PowerPoint slide that's never going to be briefed by a person.
I agree.
It's much easier to have a soundtrack to go with it.
I agree.
We could have a meeting, a Zoom meeting with 3 or 4 members of this committee that basically briefs portions of that package. We record it in an account, in a Zoom account, in my Zoom account. We save that off and post it as a YouTube, and put that YouTube out in the email that says, hey, everybody, go look at this presentation from the team. We could also provide links to the actual PowerPoint if people want it, but it would be presented and recorded just like we did today with Steve.
If you can do that, that sounds great, Mark.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. We could probably pull that together here in the next week or two. Just figure out which 3 or 4 of us should do that.
I agree. I think it could be a pretty quick turnaround.
Let me just double check after this meeting's over that I can in fact I'm looking at the recording here, that I can in fact download the results of this meeting, that we could then push it to YouTube. So
who do you see being on that subcommittee, Mark?
Probably like Dave, Jay, maybe Tom, and then like maybe you, myself, Mark, whoever else wants to chime in. But I kind of thinking Jay, Tom, and Dave Shaw probably the key 3 folks, and I'd be willing to be part of that as well. And
I agree.
yeah, anyone else. So
I think if you start getting too big, that takes away from, I think a small group can handle it better.
yeah, I agree.
One of the things that Mark Young said at the beginning, and I think even Steve said it, was they look to do a lot of work in April to get the approval in July. Mark Young's comment was, well, there's no way that we could do that in this time frame. So we're talking, another full year plus 5 months before any of this would actually get approved, right?
No, get submitted.
Get submitted,
Approved,
right? So, not submitted, right?
In October.
Right. So going back to Dave Breccia's point is, we're not ready to pull the trigger on this. There's a lot of work to be done. And just that part that we just described is a long time away, right? It's next.
Well, I think next year.
I think there's 2 different.
Well, the virus came around, weren't we?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I think Mark even felt that we were shooting for next year anyway, even before the virus happened.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's 2 things at play here. One is the Finance Committee presentation of the general state of the church. I think that's what we're looking to get out relatively quickly.
Correct.
The second phase of it is, how do we deal with long-term income, part of which is the potential development of a portion of the property. And obviously that is going to be a much longer range project, whatever. But I think, getting the financial picture out in a relatively short period of time is of the essence.
So could we do the same thing you just suggested, except do the Zoom thing with a couple of you guys just to talk about the financial situation first, and throw in okay, here's one solution we're thinking about developing the land on as, a closer, and do that first?
Well, I think the PowerPoint we've been discussing does both. I think in the very beginning, it talks about the finance, and then it goes all the way through to, and we think developing the land is the best solution.
Okay.
Yeah, if you haven't looked at that recently, take another look at that. It tries to accomplish both, and I don't know if it's too big. But that we were going to try to cover everything in one meeting.
So maybe we should do that first. Try and cover that first instead of. I guess what I think I'm hearing is that this thing you're talking about videotaping was more talking about the project of developing the land. Was that correct?
No, it was videotaping the PowerPoint that exists, which covers the whole story.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
And sorry, I had to step away, but Ed, you started talking about, well, maybe we have a year and next month. Robert Peters, again, another opinion. Nobody knows if COVID's going to impact this. His opinion was that maybe the deadline, the November deadline that people have talked about, slips a quarter or something like that. So maybe, tonight Steve said maybe the whole thing gets put off for a year, that they do none of them this year. Robert Peters was saying maybe they slip a quarter. I think the answer is nobody knows, but
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
so I think this was a great discussion. I think we, as a group, kind of came together. And Jay, you said you'll take the next pass at the PowerPoint because you have some things you wanted to put in it. And Mark, you'll test to see if we can turn a recorded Zoom into something people can access on YouTube or someplace. And we kind of floated the idea of a smaller working group. If anybody's name who wasn't mentioned wants to be a part of that, just raise your hand right now.
Yeah, and I would recommend when that smaller group gets together to create the video prior to that, the group get together, maybe do I would say almost like script it out, like who's going to do which pages.
Yeah.
What are the main talking points that each one of you want to hit for each of the subsections and whatnot. So
in essence, this video is going to be in lieu of our congregational meeting then.
Yeah.
kind of, unfortunately it's a one-way presentation,
but it's the best we can do under the circumstances.
Right, and I think it's a better way to approach it than just throwing out PowerPoint slides that don't have.
I agree, and I also think that the sooner the information disseminated, the better we are.
Mm-hmm.
Period. You know.
And Dave Shaw, is there any way that you could include maybe at the end of the PowerPoint or even your this YouTube thing, whatever you're going to do, that you could give some names of people to talk to, so church members could either email or call or whatever? I mean, I think anybody on this committee could be on that list of people to talk with, so that people know, oh, I could call.
That's a good idea.
I personally am going to tell everybody to call Ed, but that's just me.
I'm good at the hours between 6 p.m. and 12 a.m. Call me then.
You can roll names and phone numbers in the credits.
Just one name.
That might have a bigger plus for us than we think, considering whose names are attached. To talk to. I mean, I think blowing our horns, but I mean that it could be a very big plus for it.
Right.
Is there anybody? Does anybody have any feelings about leveraging people from other committees as well? Someone from Ad Council. I don't. Do we want to pull Ryan in as chair of Ad Council, or anybody from any of the other committees? I don't know.
I think we got it.
Yeah, smaller the better.
Okay.
I mean, there's 12 of us, 11 or 12 of us already.
12 disciples.
Me doesn't get it.
But 2 of us are going to have to leave because the limit's 10 now under COVID.
I volunteer as tribute.
All right, so how about, should we shoot to have, what if we shoot to have the PowerPoint, at least the PowerPoint created and kind of finalized by this weekend, maybe? Mark Plichet, we can catch up, see how you're doing with the recording and the potential YouTube posting or whatever, and maybe we can record this thing next week and get it out there.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, folks, it's been a pretty good meeting. Anything else there, Jay?
One other thing I'll add, just like Tom gave an update on the finance, you may have noticed or you've seen in e-news, we're advertising 2 new ways to contribute. Now, if you go to the website and hit the donate button, there is a form right there, and you can start a one-time contribution or a recurring contribution, and you can download an app to your phone to do the same thing. So Jane has started to get some income that way. We don't have an April result yet, but checks are coming in and donations are coming in via other avenues. So it seems like we're okay for our regular giving revenue.
Great. Excellent. Thanks, Dave. Mark, would you mind closing us with prayer?
Sure.
Thank you.
Lord, we thank you that we're able to ask the questions that we ask, that we're able to say, how do we do something instead of can we do something? We're grateful for all the people that were involved in the location of the church 56 years ago. And we're grateful for the people that'll be here 56 years after we're gone. Help us to put all things in the perspective of your eternity. Whether it's this or whether it's the things that we face tomorrow morning. Whatever they are, they're in your hands. And now we ask you to hold them safely and grant us a good night's rest. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, gentlemen.
Good night.
Miss you guys.